It was a cold, gray morning in the North Atlantic, so cold the sea seemed to hold its breath. Waves rolled slow and heavy, like the ocean itself was tired. Far below the surface, hidden in the crushing dark, the USS Arkansas moved silently. It wasn't just any submarine. It was one of the most advanced warships ever built by human hands, nuclear-powered, nearly invisible to sonar, and packed with enough firepower to change the course of a war without ever surfacing. The crew inside worked in hushed tones, eyes locked on glowing screens, ears tuned to the soft hum of machinery and the occasional ping of distant sonar. They were part of a routine NATO exercise, tracking phantom enemy subs, testing response times, keeping sharp. Nothing unusual. At least that's what they thought. Then, at 0317 ship time, something changed. A blip appeared on the passive sonar display. Not loud, not fast, but wrong. It didn't sound like a Russian sub or a Chinese drone or even a whale. It made no engine noise, no cavitation, no telltale vibrations. Just a smooth, steady presence, like a shadow sliding through water that refused to ripple. The sonar operator leaned forward, frowning. "Captain, you need to see this." The captain, a veteran with 20 years under his belt and salt in his veins, stepped over. He studied the screen for a long moment. Could it be a glitch, ice? A thermal layer playing tricks? "No, sir," the operator said quietly. "It's solid, and it's holding depth right below the thermocline. Not drifting, not moving with the current, just waiting." Tension crept through the narrow corridors of the sub. Men who'd faced storms near misses, and drills that felt like real combat now exchanged glances that said the same thing. This isn't normal. Up in orbit, thousands of miles above, other eyes were watching too. U.S. Space Command had picked up something strange entering Earth's atmosphere a few hours earlier, an object that didn't match any satellite, rocket or space junk in the global catalog. It didn't burn up. It didn't transmit. It just arrived, and then it stopped, hovering over the same patch of ocean where the Arkansas now sat, frozen in caution. Back in Washington, deep inside a secure bunker beneath the Pentagon, a red phone rang. Not the kind you see in movies, but a real encrypted line tied to a Cold War-era contingency plan no one thought they'd ever use. The code name? Looking Glass. Designed for the unthinkable. Contact with something not from Earth. Within minutes, orders crackled over secure channels to the Arkansas. Hold position. Do not engage. Do not reveal active sonar. Observe and report. Await further instructions. The crew didn't know why, but they felt it. The air grew heavier. Even the hum of the reactor seemed quieter, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. Hours passed. The strange object below didn't move. It didn't respond to low-power pings. It just existed, calm, patient, alien in the truest sense of the word. Then, without warning, the ocean around them shimmered. Not with light, there was none down here, but with a sudden, unnatural stillness. The water pressure sensors spiked and dropped in a pattern no natural phenomenon could explain. And then came the sound, a low, resonant tone like a bell struck deep inside the earth. It lasted less than 3 seconds. But in that time, every screen on the sub flickered. Lights dimmed. Some crew members gasped, clutching their heads as if struck by a sudden wave of nausea. One swore he tasted metal on his tongue. Then, silence. The sonar screen went blank for a heartbeat. Then rebooted. The blip was gone, but something had happened. Something had scanned them. Not like a radar sweep or a sonar ping, but something deeper, faster. Like it had seen not just their hull, but their wiring, their reactor core, even the sweat on their brows. In the control room, the captain stared at the empty display, heart pounding. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Everyone on board knew. They hadn't just been watched. They'd been read back in Washington. Analysts scrambled. The Arkansas had managed to send a short burst transmission before the anomaly hit, just enough data to confirm the impossible. The object wasn't human, and it hadn't come alone. Yet instead of panic, a strange calm settled over the command center, because as they pieced together the fragments, the silent approach, the precision of the scan, the total lack of aggression, they realized something even more unsettling. This wasn't an attack. It was an assessment. Someone or something had come to see what Earth was capable of, and they'd chosen to look at a warship. Not a city, not a broadcast tower, not a peaceful research station. A submarine built to kill, hide, and survive in the darkest places on the planet. Why? The answer wouldn't come for days. But in that moment, deep beneath the waves, the crew of the Arkansas felt something few soldiers ever do. The eerie sensation of being judged by eyes they couldn't see, and found worthy of attention. No one slept that night. Not because they were scared, though they were, but because they knew, with a quiet certainty, that the world had just changed. And humanity hadn't fired a single shot. Above them, the stars watched, and somewhere out there, a decision was being made. The moment the strange pulse hit the submarine, everything went quiet. Not just the machines, but the people too. For a few heartbeats, no one spoke. No one moved. It was like the whole crew had been frozen in place by something they couldn't explain. Then the lights flickered back on. The screens rebooted and the hum of the reactor returned. But nothing felt normal anymore. Down in the sonar room, the operator rubbed his temples. His ears were still ringing, not from sound, but from that weird pressure in his skull, like someone had reached inside his head and gently squeezed. He glanced at his teammate, who just shook his head slowly, eyes wide. They didn't need words. They both knew. Whatever that was, it wasn't human tech. Up in the control room, the captain stood perfectly still, staring at the sonar display. The blip was gone, vanished, not fading out, not moving away, just gone like it had never been there. But the data logs told a different story. The ship's sensors had recorded a burst of energy unlike anything in their databases, coherent, focused, and impossibly fast. It had swept over the entire hull in less time than it takes to blink, and it hadn't damaged anything. Not a wire, not a circuit. It hadn't even tripped a single alarm. It was like the pulse wasn't meant to hurt. It was meant to see. Back in Washington, things were moving fast but quietly. In a secure room deep underground, military leaders, scientists, and intelligence officers gathered around a large screen showing the raw data from the Arkansas. At first, they thought it might be some kind of new Russian or Chinese weapon. A silent drone, maybe, or an experimental sonar jammer. But the more they looked, the less it made sense. This energy signature, one scientist muttered, squinting at the waveform. It doesn't match any known physics. No EM leakage, no thermal bloom, no particle trail. It's like it came from nowhere and went back to nowhere. Another officer leaned forward. Could it be a glitch? A system error caused by deep-sea pressure or magnetic interference? The lead analyst shook his head. No, the sub's backup systems recorded the same thing. And look at this. He pulled up a second feed, satellite imagery from orbit. At the exact same second the pulse hit the sub, a small object detached from the unidentified craft in space and dropped straight into the ocean. No parachute. No heat shield. It just fell, and then it rose again seconds later. A heavy silence filled the room. Someone whispered they sent a probe. To scan us, the implications hit like a wave. This wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. Someone, or something, had deliberately targeted a U.S. nuclear submarine, one of Earth's most advanced and secretive weapons, and scanned it with technology so advanced it left no trace except in the ship's logs and the memories of the crew. Meanwhile, aboard the Arkansas, life tried to return to normal, but normal was gone. Men who had spent years training for every possible scenario, torpedo attacks, reactor failures, depth charges, now found themselves staring at the walls, lost in thought. What did the scan find? Did it see the nuclear warheads stored in the torpedo room? The AI-assisted targeting systems? The fact that this single vessel could stay hidden under the ice for months, ready to strike anywhere on the planet? One young sailor, barely 20, sat alone in the mess during his off-watch. He wasn't supposed to be thinking about this stuff. He was just there to monitor systems and follow orders. But he couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just been measured, like a lion sizing up prey, or a rival. Back in space, the alien vessel remained motionless. No signals, no movement, just watching. Then something unexpected happened. Deep inside the alien ship, far from Earth but connected through technology humans couldn't even imagine, the data from the scan began to unfold. To the beings aboard, Earth had been a curiosity, a blue dot in a quiet corner of the galaxy emitting radio noise and primitive heat signatures. They'd assumed it was a young, divided world, easy to study, or if needed, easy to control. But what the scan showed stunned them. This wasn't a primitive planet. This was a world that built machines that could live in total darkness for decades, powered by miniature stars locked inside steel shells. Machines that could launch fire across continents in minutes. Machines that healed themselves, adapted, and hid so well even their own kind sometimes lost them. Worse, the data revealed something deeper. Earth's warships weren't alone. They were part of a vast invisible web, satellites watching from above, undersea cables carrying secrets, radar nets stretching across continents. And all of it was held together not by peace but by fear, a delicate balance where every nation watched every other, ready to destroy everything if pushed too far. To the aliens, that was terrifying. A species that could build such things and then choose not to use them unless absolutely necessary wasn't weak. It was dangerous in a way they'd never seen, not because it wanted to conquer, but because it had already mastered survival in the harshest way possible. By preparing for the worst, every single day. One of the alien commanders reviewed the scan again. He saw the reactor's efficiency, 98% energy conversion, no waste heat leaks. He saw the stealth coating that bent sound waves like water around a stone. He saw the crew's biometrics, elevated heart rates but steady hands. Discipline under unknown threat. He turned to his second-in-command and sent a single thought through their shared neural link. They don't just build weapons. They build silence. And silence is the hardest thing to fight. On Earth, no one knew any of this, but the Arkansas's captain felt it in his gut. He ordered a slow, careful ascent to periscope depth, not to surface, just to peak. When the scope broke the waves, the sky was clear. Stars glittered cold and distant. Nothing moved. No lights, no ships. Just the endless ocean and the quiet hum of a planet that had no idea it had just been tested. And passed. The captain lowered the scope. "Take us back down," he said softly. "And log everything. Every second, because he knew this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. And whatever was out there had just learned something important about humanity. We might not be the strongest or the fastest or the smartest in the galaxy. But we build things that last. Things that hide. Things that wait. And sometimes that's enough to make even the stars think twice." Back on their home world, so far away that light itself would take centuries to make the trip, the alien command center fell into a silence unlike any they'd known. The data from the Earth scan had been fully processed, and what it revealed didn't match any of their expectations. They had come expecting chaos, division, weakness. Instead, they found something far more unsettling. Discipline wrapped in steel, patience hidden beneath ice, and a kind of quiet readiness that didn't roar. It waited. Their civilization had spent millennia perfecting the art of conquest. They didn't invade with brute force alone. They studied first. They looked for cracks, fear, greed, disunity, and poured themselves into those gaps like water. On dozens of worlds it had worked. Civilizations crumbled from within before a single shot was fired. But Earth was different. The scan showed a planet teetering on the edge of self-destruction, yes, but also one that had somehow built systems to keep that edge from collapsing. Nuclear weapons? Yes. But also treaties, fail-safes, human operators with the final say. Warships capable of wiping cities off the map? Absolutely. But they sailed under strict rules, watched by enemies and allies alike. Held in check by something the aliens struggled to understand. Mutual fear, yes, but also something deeper. Something like restraint. One of their senior strategists replayed the submarine's profile again and again. A vessel that could vanish for months, powered by a tiny artificial sun in its core, carrying enough firepower to level a nation, yet operating under layers of human judgment, protocol, and caution. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a statement. We can destroy you, but we choose not to, unless you force our hand. That kind of control, in a species so young, so emotionally volatile, was terrifying. In their own history, any civilization that reached this level of technological power had either destroyed itself within decades or turned outward in violent expansion. Earth had done neither. It had built doomsday machines and then locked them in vaults with keys held by multiple hands, none of whom trusted the others completely, yet all of whom understood the cost of turning the key. How? One of the younger analysts finally asked, voice trembling through their shared thought link. How do they live like this? Always on the brink yet never falling? The elder commander didn't answer right away. He gazed at the star map, where Earth glowed faintly in a quiet spiral arm of an unremarkable galaxy. They don't see it as living on the brink, he finally sent. They see it as surviving, and survival for them isn't about winning. It's about lasting one more day. That idea that a species would endure not through dominance but through sheer stubborn persistence was alien to them. Their own society valued clarity, hierarchy, decisive action. Earth was messy, contradictory, full of noise and contradiction. Yet somehow that messiness had forged something resilient. Worse still, the scan had picked up hints of more. Not just submarines, but networks. Satellites that watched every square kilometer of the planet. Drones that could fly for days without landing. Cyber systems that could cripple infrastructure without firing a bullet. And all of it was decentralized. No single point of failure. No one leader to remove. No capital to bomb into surrender. To conquer Earth wouldn't be like taking a city or a continent. It would be like trying to drown the ocean. You could pour in endless force, but the water would just absorb it, shift, and keep moving. A debate broke out among the command. Some argued they should strike now before Earth grew stronger. Others warned that any attack would unite the planet instantly, and what they'd seen suggested that a united Earth would be a nightmare to face. Imagine every nation, every military, every hacker, every scientist turning their full attention outward, not inward. The very thing that made Earth fragile, its divisions also made it unpredictable. And unpredictability was the enemy of control. One commander, older than most, finally spoke with quiet authority. We came to assess a potential resource. We found a sleeping dragon wrapped in chains of its own making. Those chains are weak, but the dragon knows it, and it has learned to sleep with one eye open. He paused, letting the image settle. If we pull one chain, it wakes. If we pull too many, it burns us to ash, and we have no fireproof suits. Back on Earth, no one knew any of this. But in secure rooms across the globe, human leaders were having their own reckoning. The US, Russia, China, the EU, all had received fragments of the incident through back-channel intelligence sharing. No one admitted it publicly, but behind closed doors, the usual rivalries softened just a little. Because for the first time in history, there was a threat that didn't carry a flag or speak a human language. Military planners began quietly updating protocols. Not for war with each other, but for something else. Scientists who once argued over funding now shared data on anomalous energy signatures. Even old enemies exchanged encrypted messages with a simple question. Did you see it too? On the streets, life went on as usual. People scrolled through phones, argued about politics, worried about bills. They had no idea that for a few seconds their entire species had been weighed and found not weak but complicated. Dangerous not because of what they had, but because of how they used it. And deep in the ocean, the USS Arkansas continued its patrol, silent and unseen. The crew didn't talk much about what happened. They didn't need to. They felt it in the way they checked their instruments twice, in the way they listened a little harder to the sounds outside the hull. They weren't just sailors anymore. They were witnesses. What the aliens didn't understand, and what humans could never fully explain, was that Earth's strength wasn't in its weapons. It was in its people, in the engineer who stayed up all night fixing a glitch in a radar system, in the sailor who kept his hands steady even when his heart raced, in the leaders who, for all their flaws, had somehow avoided lighting the fuse for 70 years. That wasn't luck. That was choice. Repeated, daily, by millions of people who never saw each other's faces but shared the same fragile world. And somewhere, across the void, a civilization that thought it understood power was learning a new lesson. Sometimes, the most fearsome thing in the universe isn't a weapon. It's the will to keep going, even when you're scared, even when you're divided, even when the odds say you shouldn't survive. Earth hadn't won a battle. It hadn't fired a shot. But in that moment, it had done something rarer. It had made a smarter, older, stronger species hesitate. And hesitation, in the cold math of the cosmos, was the first sign of defeat. The alien ship didn't vanish with a flash or a roar. It simply stopped being there. One moment it was a dark silhouette against the starfield, motionless and unreadable. The next it was gone, as if someone had blinked and erased it from reality. No explosion, no trail, no distortion in the sky. Just empty space where something enormous had been. On Earth, no alarms sounded. No news channels broke in with urgent updates. To the billions going about their day, driving to work, walking dogs, sipping coffee, the sky remained just the sky. But in a handful of secure command centers, from underground bunkers to naval bases on remote islands, people held their breath. Sensors that had been locked onto the object suddenly went quiet. Radar returned to normal. Space tracking networks blinked in confusion, then logged the event as anomalous departure, cause unknown. Aboard the USS Arkansas, still deep beneath the waves, the crew felt the change before they saw it. The water around them, once charged with that strange, heavy stillness, relaxed. The pressure normalized. The ocean sounds returned. The groan of distant ice, the click of shrimp, the slow sigh of currents. It was as if the sea itself had exhaled. The captain didn't celebrate. He didn't even smile. He just gave a quiet order. Begin full systems check. Log everything. Assume we're still being watched, but deep down he knew they were alone again. What happened next surprised everyone, even the aliens. Before vanishing, the alien vessel had sent one final message. Not through radio waves, not through light, but through a method so subtle it almost slipped past human detection. A tiny data packet, encoded in a pattern of neutrinos, ghostly particles that pass through planets like their air, was beamed directly toward the submarine. It lasted less than a second. Most systems ignored it as background noise. But the Arkansas, thanks to a classified sensor upgrade installed just months earlier, caught it. Back in Washington, cryptographers and AI analysts worked around the clock. At first they thought it might be a trap, a virus, a false flag, a trick to make them reveal more. But as they decoded the signal, a different truth emerged. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a demand, it was a gift. The data contained three things. First, a star map, showing not just Earth's location but dozens of other systems, marked with symbols that, after weeks of analysis, seemed to indicate danger zones. One cluster of stars was highlighted in a way that suggested, avoid this place. Second, a series of mathematical constants, universal truths like the speed of light or gravitational constants, but expressed in a form so elegant it made human equations look clumsy. Scientists wept when they saw it. Not because it was advanced, but because it was kind. It was knowledge offered freely, like a hand reaching across the dark. And third, a single line of meaning translated not through language, but through shared patterns of logic and emotion. We misjudged you. Do not follow. That last part hit hardest. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't fear. It was respect and warning. They had come thinking Earth was prey. They left knowing it was something else entirely. And they didn't want humanity chasing them into whatever dangers lay out there. For weeks, governments debated what to do. Some wanted to broadcast a reply. Others argued for total silence. In the end, they chose the quietest path, nothing. No signal sent. No attempt to track the departure vector. Earth would not chase. It would not provoke. It would remember and learn. The incident was sealed under a new classification, Event Janus. Named after the two-faced Roman god. It symbolized looking both forward and back, honoring the past while preparing for an unknown future. The crew of the Arkansas returned to port weeks later. They were debriefed endlessly, tested for radiation, psychological stress, even genetic anomalies. But they were never told the full truth, not all of it. And they never asked. They knew enough. They had stood on the edge of something vast and ancient, and instead of crumbling, they'd held their ground. Life tried to return to normal. But normal had shifted. In naval academies, new courses were quietly added: non-terrestrial threat recognition, anomalous sensor signatures, first contact protocols. Not because they expected another visit soon, but because they now knew they weren't alone. And the universe didn't care about borders or flags. Scientists began rethinking everything. If one species could cross light years to scan a submarine, what else was out there? Were they watching too? Were there others? Less careful, less respectful? The thought sent a chill through even the most skeptical minds. Yet, strangely, there was also hope. The message hadn't been hostile. It had been cautious, almost protective, like an older sibling warning a younger one not to wander into the woods at night. That meant intelligence, empathy, maybe even morality. And if one alien civilization could choose restraint, maybe others could too. Back on the ocean, The Arkansas was dry docked for maintenance. Engineers crawled over every inch of its hull searching for traces of the scan. Microscopic changes, strange residues, anything. They found nothing. The aliens had left no mark. But the crew knew better. The mark wasn't on the steel. It was in their minds. One evening, long after the debriefings ended, a group of sailors stood on the pier, looking out at the dark water. No one spoke for a long time. Then one of them said softly, "Do you think they're watching us right now?" Another shook his head. "I don't know. But I hope they see we listened. Because Earth hadn't fired, hadn't panicked, hadn't turned on itself. Instead, it had done something rare in the history of intelligent life. It had shown discipline in the face of the unknown. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of human eyes, a civilization that once saw Earth as a target, now saw it as something else. A species that built warships not to conquer, but to endure. And in the cold, silent theater of the cosmos, endurance was the rarest weapon of all. The aliens were gone, but their warning and their respect remained. And for the first time, humanity didn't feel small. It felt seen, and that changed everything. Years passed. The world kept turning. Cars still jammed the highways, kids still laughed in schoolyards, and the news still buzzed with the same old mix of hope and heartbreak. To most people, life felt unchanged. But beneath the surface, literally and figuratively, everything had shifted. The story of the submarine and the silent visitor never made the front pages. Governments kept it locked away, buried under layers of classification so deep it might have stayed hidden forever. But secrets have a way of leaking, especially when they're too big to hold. A few years after the event, fragments began to surface, whispers in defense forums, blurry documents in Freedom of Information requests, offhand comments from retired officers at quiet bars. At first, people dismissed it as conspiracy talk. But then came the satellite images, the declassified sensor logs, the undeniable gaps in official naval records. Slowly, the truth seeped into public awareness, not as a wild alien tale, but as a sobering possibility. Earth had been visited, and whoever came left in a hurry. Instead of panic, something unexpected happened. People didn't riot. They didn't build bunkers or stockpile food. They got curious. Universities saw a surge in astronomy and ocean engineering programs. High school students started science clubs focused on deep space communication. Even artists and writers began weaving the idea into their work, not as monsters from the sky, but as a mirror held up to humanity itself. What did it say about us that the thing that scared off an advanced civilization wasn't our weapons, but our will to survive? Governments, for once, moved with unusual unity, not because they trusted each other more, but because they finally had a common horizon beyond their borders. New international protocols were quietly signed. Every major navy began retrofitting its ships with Janus-class sensor arrays, systems designed not to shoot but to see, to detect the kind of silent, non-human signatures that had slipped past Earth's defenses before. Satellites were upgraded. Deep-sea monitoring nets expanded. Not for war, but for awareness. The message was clear. We won't be caught off guard again. But the real change wasn't in the machines. It was in the mindset. Old rivalries didn't vanish overnight. Tension still flared, but something subtle had shifted in the background. When leaders sat in rooms making decisions that could shake the world, there was now an unspoken question hanging in the air. What if they're watching? Not as a threat, but as a reminder. A reminder that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its bombs or its borders, but its ability to choose restraint when every instinct screamed to strike. The USS Arkansas was eventually retired, not because it was outdated, but because it had become something more than a warship. It was a symbol. After years in dry dock, it was moved to a naval museum on the coast open to the public. Visitors walked its narrow corridors, peered into the control room, and stood silently in the sonar bay where the impossible had once been heard. A simple plaque near the entrance read, "Here humanity's shadow frightened the stars." No fanfare, no exaggeration, just truth plain and quiet. School groups came often. Teachers would point to the reactor compartment and say, "This powered the ship for months without refueling. It's like carrying a piece of the sun inside steel." Kids would stare, wide-eyed, not just at the engineering, but at the idea that humans could build something so powerful, and then choose to keep it hidden, not for attack but for peace. Meanwhile, out in the void, the galaxy kept spinning. No new visitors came. No signals arrived. But Earth no longer felt alone in a lonely way. It felt observed, not judged, not hunted, but acknowledged. And that changed how people saw themselves. They weren't just citizens of a country or followers of a belief. They were Earthlings, part of a single fragile experiment in intelligence, courage, and survival. Scientists kept listening. Not with fear, but with patience. They pointed radio telescopes toward the stars and sent out gentle pulses. Not demands, not boasts, but greetings wrapped in mathematics and music. They knew the odds were long, but they also knew something now that they hadn't before. Intelligence doesn't always come with conquest. Sometimes it comes with caution, with respect, with a warning whispered in neutrinos, and maybe, just maybe, with hope. Back in towns and cities, ordinary people began to look up more often, not in fear but in wonder. Parents pointed out constellations to their children and said, "Out there someone saw us and decided we were worth leaving alone." That idea, simple as it was, carried weight. It reminded people that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet hum of a submarine in the deep. Sometimes it's the choice not to fire. Sometimes it's the courage to keep going even when you're scared. Years later, an old sailor who'd served on the Arkansas returned to the museum. He walked slowly through the familiar halls, running a hand along the cold metal walls. He didn't speak to anyone. He just stood for a long time in the control room, eyes closed, remembering the silence after the scan, the silence that wasn't empty, but full of meaning. When he left, he paused at the door and looked out at the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the water gold and red. He smiled just a little, not because he had answers, but because he knew one thing for certain. Earth hadn't won by fighting. It had won by being itself flawed, fierce, and stubbornly alive. And somewhere in the endless dark between stars, another civilization told its young a simple story before sleep. Never scan the blue planet. They build tombs that fight back. But on Earth, they knew the truth. They hadn't built tombs. They'd built lifeboats, and they were still floating.